The conference hall on the 14th floor of Lagos's most prestigious business hotel was buzzing with laughter, the kind of laughter that cuts right through you. At the center of it all stood Adaeze Okonkwo, trembling as her uncle proudly showed off the envelope he had just collected. "She's his problem now," someone joked from the back of the room. Across the hall leaned the groom, a man everyone in Lagos already knew for the wrong reasons. His designer shirt was crumpled, his eyes were glassy, and several guests were openly smirking at the sight of him beside someone like Adaeze. "Go to your husband," her aunt hissed, pushing her forward. And then, just as Adaeze's chest was about to collapse under the weight of it all, the man they called a drunk lifted his head. His eyes were completely clear. The quiet sentence he murmured made the smile drain slowly from her aunt's face. Because the man everyone had written off as worthless was clearly not what he appeared to be. Before we continue this story, tell us in the comments which country you're watching from, and what time is it there right now. Stories like this reach hearts across so many nations, and it's always powerful to see where our viewers are joining from. And if you love stories about courage, hidden truth, and unexpected destiny, please subscribe to African Heritage Tales so you never miss the next one. Now, let us begin Adaeze's story. The alarm on Adaeze Okonkwo's phone went off at 5 in the morning, just like it did every single day. She silenced it quickly and swung her feet onto the cold tiled floor of the small room she had been given in her uncle's apartment in Surulere, a dense, busy neighborhood in Lagos. The room was barely large enough for the narrow bed, a plastic chair, and the 2 bags that held everything she owned. Through the thin wall, she could already hear her aunt's voice carrying down the hallway. "Adaeze, you're still sleeping? The market won't wait for you." She was 22 years old. She had not slept past 5 in the morning in over 4 years. Her parents, Emmanuel and Grace Okonkwo, had been killed in a road accident on the Benin-Lagos Expressway when Adaeze was 17. Her younger brother had been sent to live with relatives in Enugu. Adaeze had been taken in by her father's younger brother, Uncle Jide Okonkwo, and his wife, Auntie Ngozi. The community praised Jide at first for being generous and responsible. Within 3 months, everyone had forgotten to check on her. Because inside that apartment, Adaeze was not family, she was labor. Every morning before sunrise, she was in the kitchen. Every afternoon, she manned a provision stall at the Ojuelegba market under Auntie Ngozi's name. Every evening, she handed over the day's earnings, every single naira, without being allowed to keep even enough for bus fare. When the sales were short, the insults were long. Sometimes it was more than insults. That particular morning, she tied her hair back, pulled on a faded yellow blouse, and lifted the heavy basket of provisions she had packed before dawn. The streets of Surulere were already awake by the time she stepped outside. Commercial buses roared past, hawkers called out prices, and the smell of frying akara drifted through the humid air. She had made this walk so many times that her feet knew every crack in the pavement. "Adaeze, Adaeze, come," called Mama Ifunanya, an older woman who sold grilled corn beside the provisions section. She was one of the few people at the market who always greeted Adaeze with warmth. "You came early. Sit down, let me look at you." Adaeze gave a soft smile and settled her basket on the wooden table. Mama Ifunanya was the kind of woman who noticed things. The circles beneath Adaeze's eyes, the careful way she counted her coins, the small, quiet generosity she practiced despite having almost nothing. Once, when a young mother with a hungry toddler couldn't afford a tin of sardines, Adaeze quietly made up the difference from the little she had hidden in her bra. Mama Ifunanya had seen it. She had not forgotten. "Your heart is going to surprise you one day," the older woman often told her. Adaeze never knew what to say to that. She didn't think of kindness as a strategy. It was just the only way she knew how to be. By midday, the market was thick with heat and noise. Danfo buses screeched outside, generators hummed. Adaeze counted her sales for the 3rd time and felt her stomach tighten. It was still below Auntie Ngozi's target. Then a woman with a toddler on her hip came to her table, dug through a worn purse, and came up short for a bag of rice. Adaeze looked at the child. She handed over the rice. "God will bless you," the woman said. Mama Ifunanya watched from 2 stalls away. "One day," she said later, soft as breath, "all of this will come back to you." Adaeze laughed lightly, though the sound held no real joy. She did not believe life worked that cleanly. She arrived home that evening to Auntie Ngozi standing at the kitchen doorway with her arms crossed. The envelope with the day's earnings was snatched from Adaze's hand before she could even set down the empty basket. Ngozi counted. Her face darkened. "Is this all?" "I sold everything." The slap was quick. Adaeze steadied herself against the wall. From the living room, Uncle Chidi was watching football on his phone with his earbuds in. He did not look up. That night, after the household had eaten and she had been given the leftover jollof, cold, slightly burnt at the bottom, she sat near the kitchen window and ate alone. Through the louvres, she could hear Chidi and Ngozi arguing in low voices in their bedroom. She caught certain words. Debt. The name Emeka Okafor. A number, and then her own name. "The girl is the only card we have left." Her chest went still. "There's a man willing to pay," Ngozi said. Adaeze set down her plate slowly. A cold feeling moved through her body. She rose from the kitchen stool, moved silently toward the hallway, and stood close enough to the bedroom door to hear everything that followed, and wished she hadn't. The next morning she woke feeling as though she hadn't slept at all. Something had shifted. She could feel it in the air before anyone said a word. Uncle Chidi was already awake, standing at the window in the sitting room, staring at the street below with the posture of a man carrying a decision he didn't want to carry alone. When she greeted him, he barely nodded. Auntie Ngozi was in the kitchen, moving with unusual focus, avoiding eye contact. Something was being planned, something that involved her. On her walk to the market, she ran into Mama Ifunanya earlier than usual. The older woman took one look at her face and slowed down. "You didn't sleep." "There's something happening at home," Adaeze admitted. Mama Ifunanya nodded slowly. "When families are in debt, they start looking at everything they own differently, including people." Adaeze felt the words land somewhere deep and true. Later that morning at the market, she noticed something unusual across the road. 3 men in well-cut agbada stood near the entrance of a phone accessories shop. Beside them, almost leaning against the wall with the studied casualness of someone performing laziness, was a man she recognized immediately, Jide Balogan. Everyone in the neighborhood knew him, not because he was important, but because he was impossible to respect. He spent his afternoons at bars in Surulere, always loud, always smelling of cheap beer, his clothes perpetually disheveled as though he'd slept in them. People joked that he had once had money and drunk it all away, and now the 3 well-dressed men were speaking to him, and all 4 of them glanced across at her stall. Her heart jumped. She looked down and busied herself rearranging tins. But when she looked up moments later, they were still watching. Then they moved on down the street. By evening, when she returned to the apartment, everything became clear in the worst way possible. A man was seated in their sitting room, impeccably dressed, gray suit, polished shoes, gold wristwatch. Emeka Okafor, the powerful money lender and property dealer whose influence stretched across at least 4 local government areas. Uncle Chidi owed him a debt that had been growing for over a year. Adaeze had barely stepped into the room before Okafor's sharp eyes moved over her like a scanner. "So this is her," he said. Ngozi stood quickly. "Adaeze, come." "We have good news," Ngozi began, with that particular brand of sweetness that always preceded something terrible. "You are going to be married." The word landed like a stone dropped into still water. "Married," Adaeze repeated. "Yes, to a man who has shown great interest." "To who?" Okafor smiled from his armchair. "To someone you've seen before." The name that came next, Jide Balogan, was the one she had been silently praying not to hear. That night, Adaeze sat on the edge of her bed with her hands pressed flat on her knees, staring at the opposite wall. She had tried everything. She had looked at Uncle Chidi with every ounce of appeal she had. He had looked at the floor. She had told Auntie Ngozi she would rather beg on the street. Ngozi had laughed. She had said quietly, through clenched teeth, that she would not marry a drunk, and had received a slap so sharp her ears rang for 10 minutes. "You live in this house for free," Ngozi said. "It is time you were useful." The ceiling fan clicked on every rotation. she counted them without meaning to. She had imagined her future thousands of times, finishing her business administration course, saving enough for a room of her own, meeting someone who chose her freely. Not this. Never this. Without planning to, she eventually went to the window. The street below was nearly quiet. A security guard sat under a yellow light at the end of the road. Lagos at midnight felt smaller, almost human. Through the wall came her uncle's voice one final time. "It will solve the debt problem," Okafor agreed. And that told her everything. The decision had been made before she ever walked into that sitting room. Her future had been negotiated without her. What she could not have known then, what she would only begin to understand much later, was that someone else had also arranged something, and that person's reasons were far more complicated than clearing a debt. The next morning, without planning to, she saw him. She was walking back from a provisions run near Aguda when Jide Balogan fell into step vaguely near her on the pavement. In daylight, up close, he looked slightly different from what she had expected. Still the same wrinkled shirt, still the same surface impression of someone who had lost their way, but his eyes, just for a second, did not look like the eyes of a man who had given up. "You're Adaeze Okonkwo," he said. "Yes." A pause. "Then you've been told." "Yes." She looked directly at him. "You're the man they want me to marry." "Yes." "You're always drunk." Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not a full smile, more like recognition. "That's what people believe." "What does that mean?" For just a moment, the length of a single heartbeat, his eyes became completely clear, alert, almost calculating. Then the expression was gone. He took a slow drink from the bottle he was carrying. "Nothing," he said. She turned to walk away, then stopped. "I don't want this." "I know." "Then why did you agree?" He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something she would spend the next several weeks trying to decode. "Because this marriage might be the thing that protects you." She stared at him. "Protects me from what?" But he was already walking away. The introduction ceremony happened 3 days later. The sitting room at Chidi's apartment had been rearranged, a caterer had been hired, and relatives had materialized from several parts of Lagos. People who hadn't visited in years now suddenly appearing with wrapping fabric and opinions. Women braided Adaze's hair and pinned a lace head wrap. Someone told her to smile. She smiled. It did not reach anything behind her eyes. When Jide arrived, the laughter started almost immediately. He looked exactly as people expected, caftan creased, breath carrying that familiar sharp scent. 2 of Chidi's relatives made jokes loudly enough for everyone to hear. A woman near the kitchen said, just barely under her breath, "That poor girl." Adaeze stood through the presentation with her hands clasped, looking at nothing in particular. And then something happened that she almost missed. During a moment when the elders were speaking and the room was momentarily still, she saw Jide's posture shift. It lasted only seconds. He straightened. His shoulders settled back into the frame of someone who was completely in command. His eyes moved around the room in a slow, deliberate sweep, the way you scan a space when you are looking for specific things, not admiring it. When a relative pressed a drink into his hand, the posture vanished. The slouch returned. The glazed expression came back. No one else seemed to notice. Adaeze noticed. As the ceremony ended, Jide leaned slightly toward her and said, low enough that only she could hear, "Don't be afraid. Things are not what they seem." She looked at him. His eyes were completely clear. Then someone called his name from across the room and he turned away, bottle raised, laugh back in place. And Adaeze stood very still in the middle of the celebration, with one strange, unsettling realization forming in her chest. The man everyone had written off as hopeless might be the only person in that apartment who truly understood what was happening around all of them. That night, after the last guest had left, and Auntie Ngozi had given her the final cold instruction to leave with her husband, Adaeze found herself walking down a street in Surulere she barely recognized, beside a man who was clearly not who he appeared to be. They walked without speaking for several minutes. Then Adaeze said quietly, "You don't seem very drunk right now." "You're observant," he said. "That's not an answer." He took a slow sip. "Sometimes people see exactly what they expect to see." She studied him carefully. "You're performing it. All of it." He didn't deny it. He stopped outside a modest block of flats. Clean, simple, the kind of building that doesn't attract attention. He unlocked the ground floor unit and stepped aside so she could enter first. Inside, the apartment was nothing like she had braced herself for. Orderly, almost precisely orderly. Books stacked on a shelf, a closed laptop on the table. The kind of order that belongs to someone who has chosen it deliberately. "Why did you agree to this marriage?" she asked finally when they were sitting across from each other at the small table. He was still for a long moment. Then, "You believe your family sold you to pay off a debt." "They did." "Partly," she frowned. "What's the other part?" Jide leaned back in the chair. "You know who Emeka Okafor is." "Everyone does." "Good. Then you know that men like him don't build their influence through honest work. For months, people have been watching him. People who understand exactly how that network operates. And those people needed someone in place, close to him, close enough to observe without raising suspicion." Adaeze's voice dropped. "And a drunk man is perfect for that." "Exactly. So the marriage was part of the plan." Jide met her eyes. "At the beginning, yes." She stood, walked to the window. The street below was empty, a late-night generator humming somewhere in the block. "You used me," she said. "Yes." He didn't dress it up. "At first." "And now?" The pause that followed was longer than any answer he had given her all evening. "Now," he said quietly, "things are more complicated." She stood at that window for a long time, looking out at the city that had always been too loud and too indifferent, trying to decide what to do with the truth she had just been handed. He slept in the chair that night. She had told him he didn't have to. He said he knew. He did it anyway. She lay awake for a long time, staring at the ceiling. One sentence kept circling through her mind on repeat. "This marriage might be the thing that protects you." Protects her from what, exactly? And who was this man, truly, that powerful people needed him close to one of the most dangerous moneylenders in Lagos? And why, of all the ways he could have positioned himself, did he allow an innocent woman to be pulled into the middle of it? The questions had no answers yet, and the man sleeping 3 feet away in a wooden chair was not going to offer them until he was ready. But somewhere beneath the fear, beneath the confusion, beneath everything she had lost in the last 72 hours, something else was forming, something quiet, something she didn't yet have a name for. She just knew that whatever was coming next, it was going to change everything. To be continued in Part 2, stay with African Heritage Tales to find out who Jide Balogan really is, what Emeka Okafor has been hiding, and whether Adaeze will lose everything, or finally find the life she was always meant to live.